I'm delighted to be here today. I've been teaching for 50 years, I realized, not too long ago. 35 of those, fortunately, have been at this institution. And so I want to do today is to talk to you about some of what I think has made Williams what it's been in the past and what that will look like going forward into the future. So I've called my talk The Future of the Past. I want to start with an anecdote. I graduated from Williams. I was in graduate school. I was home for the summer after my first year at Johns Hopkins, and I was talking to my mother. I forget what the subject was. I was expressing regret over something. And I remember her saying, "Charles, don't look back." And I laughed, and I said, "You know, I'm trying to be a historian. That's probably not the best advice for me. I know what you're saying." I had a good laugh. She had a good laugh. I have to look back as a historian, and certainly as someone who's part of this community. I have to look back to get a sense of where we may be going in the future. And I want to start by telling another story. This is Williams Entry F. Sure, that's not a surprise to many of you. My education at Williams began my first day on campus. I grew up in the Jim Crow South. It was 1954. That was the year of the Brown decision. I'd never been north of the Potomac. I arrived on the Williams College campus. My room was in Williams F, at the very top. I remember walking in and climbing the stairs and looking off into a room and seeing I had an African-American classmate, an African-American entry mate. And I've often said that my education at Williams began my first day on campus, before I entered my first class. And I have always been eternally grateful to this college for even then being a place where diversity and inclusion were part of the sort of culture and ethos of this institution. I can't tell you how important it was to me as a native-born Southerner who had never even had a friend on the other side of the color line, to have a classmate, to have someone I could talk to and relate to without that elaborate racial etiquette that governed the way white and black interacted in my native South. So I feel I owe Williams a huge debt of gratitude before I walked into the classroom. When I walked into the classroom, I saw people like this. This is Robert G.L. Waite. I'm sure many of you recognize him. This is Dudley W.R. Ballman. I'm sure many of you recognize him. And this is Robert C.L. Scott. I didn't know at the time there was a requirement that you had to have two middle initials to teach history at Williams. Fortunately, by the time I got here, that regulation had lapsed. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here today. Bob Scott, I again, can't tell you the debt of gratitude I owe to this man. He's why I'm here. He took a kid from the South who had all that sort of neo-Confederate nonsense and that enthusiasm for things Southern, and he channeled into a desire to study the South, to know the South, to come to grips with the South in ways that had never occurred to me before. He's the principal reason I went to graduate school. He's the principal person who determined the course of my career, and I owe him a huge debt of gratitude. That brings me to the first point I want to make about the future of the past. We have got to be able to recruit and hold an absolutely first-class faculty at Williams College. And this is not easy. We're an undergraduate institution, and people come out of graduate school hell-bent on being a scholar, on replicating the career of their mentors in graduate school. But what we are able to do here, because we have the resources to do it, is to approach these candidates and say, if you want to teach, and particularly if you want to teach undergraduates at a place where it doesn't get any better, Williams College is the place to do that. We can also tell them that we will support their scholarship, that we have the means for sabbaticals and for research grants and for travel to professional meetings. You can be both a teacher and a scholar here, and we want you to be a teacher and a scholar. We want you to be engaged with your profession, and we want you to teach at a very high level. So one of the things, the first thing I think we've got to do is to be able to recruit and to hire the caliber of faculty that you just saw as I flipped those three photographs over the screen here. My second point about the future of the past. We have got to be able to sustain the sense of community here. And there's a remarkable sense of community at Williams. There are a lot of ingredients to this, but I happen to think one of the key ingredients is the fact that we recruit our upper level administrators from the ranks of the teaching faculty. The dean of the college, the dean of the faculty, the provost. They're recruited from the ranks of the teaching faculty. They spend their time in Hopkins Hall, and then they come back to teach. This is exceedingly rare in the academic world. I can't tell you how rare it is. But it happens here, and it happens because people are willing to invest in the institution. And what it means is that we aren't at loggerheads with the administration. They are us. And we know that when they're finished, they're coming back to the classroom. That sense of community that's built just on that one simple thing is really quite extraordinary. We've got to be able to continue to do this. We must have faculty who are willing to make that kind of investment when the president comes knocking or twists your arm or whatever it takes to get the job done, Frank. I'm not sure how you manage to do it, how other people, John Chandler people, manage to do it, but it happens. We also need leadership at the college, and I'm putting examples of both good and bad leadership on the screen. This is my leading example of bad leadership. If you don't recognize this man, good. This is Zephaniah Swift Moore. Zephaniah Swift Moore led the defectors of 1821 over to the squalid village of Amherst, founded the college that still bears the name of that said village. He's an example of how bad leadership can poison the well. I've often thought that this was the early 19th century equivalent of a mug shot. Doesn't that look like that profile view that you would see from the sheriff's department? We were never able to get him back over here for what he deserved. Bad leadership and a sense of community don't go together. On the other hand, good leadership and a sense of community are vital. This is Edward Dorr Griffin. We've gone from the dark side to the bright side of Williams College leadership. This is the man who saved the college after Moore and the defectors took off in 1821. Determined to save Williams. How did he do it? He went to the alumni and said, we need your help. We need your support if we're going to sustain this college in the wilderness. And the alumni responded, and Edward Dorr Griffin was able to build this magnificent building that carries his name. Opened in 1828. Zephaniah Swift Moore tries to kill Williams in its crib in 1821. Edward Dorr Griffin, by 1828, has a building on campus that will raise that infant from his or her, as it now is, infancy to adulthood. I love to teach in Griffin Hall. It's my favorite place to teach. I have a certain number of recidivist students who take more than one class with me. I discourage recidivism. I tell them you've only got 32 classes during your 4 years here. But I have a few who come back. And I was in there beginning of this semester, and one of my students said, Professor Dew, why do you always teach in Griffin Hall? And I said, you can feel the heart of Williams College beating in Griffin Hall. This is the place where Edward Dorr Griffin decided to take his stand and make the college. And I teach the South. I teach the Civil War and Reconstruction. And it was in this building that Edward Dorr Griffin taught this man. His face probably is not something you recognize. William Lowndes Yancey, the Prince of Fire Eaters, the leading voice for disunion and secession in the antebellum South, sometime member of the Williams class of 1833, who learned oratory and rhetoric at the feet of Edward Dorr Griffin. He also compiled probably the worst disciplinary record in the history of the college. But I told my student, this is why I love this building. I mentioned Yancey. He had been in my Old South class. He nodded, yes, sir, I know. And I took probably less than 5 minutes to explain why I love Griffin Hall, but I did explain why I love Griffin Hall. So one of the things we have here is this incredible sense of community. Leadership counts. The whole notion of recruiting our administrators from the ranks of the faculty count. But what really counts at the end of the day is Mark Hopkins and the log. It's that sense of all being in this together, of being faculty and being students in a collective enterprise. One of my favorite stories about my favorite students. I had a student one year who wanted to do an honors thesis with me. He was a bright kid. He was a solid student, very gifted athlete. Tight end on the football team, shortstop on the baseball team. He's from the South, from Chattanooga. And he wanted to do a study, an honors thesis on John Singleton Mosby, who had been a partisan ranger during the Civil War. And I said, okay, on your way back home to Chattanooga, I want you to go to Duke. I want you to go to University of Virginia. There are Mosby papers there. You've done okay with me, but you're wanting to do an honors thesis. Let's see if you're serious about it. He came back, fired up, ready to go. Came in to give me his first chapter. Sat him down at my desk, pulled out that thing we used to put typewriters on. You remember those days? Pulled that shelf out. On one side, me on the other. We went over it line by line. Kind of a mess. A lot of red marks on that paper. I said, you can't bring me another chapter like this. I won't, sir, he said. He's from the South, he said, sir. The next chapter was markedly better. Third chapter was terrific. By the time he finished his thesis, he won one of the major prizes that we give in the history department for American history. And at the end of this whole enterprise, he said he wanted to bring something by for me. And I said, what's that, Lou? And he said, no, I just want to bring it by. I said, you don't have to bring anything. It's been fun just teaching you. What he brought by my house was this. This is a French tree. He planted this tree in my side yard. Doesn't look this good now. But later in the spring, it'll look like this. He checks up on it every time he's back in town. I take very good care of it. But this is what I mean when I say that we are all in this together. And there is this remarkable sense that we are part of a collective enterprise. Which leads me directly and immediately into my next and final point, my third point. We must continue to bring the remarkable students that we bring to Williams College on a regular basis. Much of the achievement of where we are, as Chris pointed out in his wonderful presentation, one of the things he pointed out is that this gentleman, Jack Sawyer, love this picture of him in front of Griffin Hall, had the foresight to do many things for us, but two I want to mention very briefly. First, he put fraternities on the road to extinction here. This is my old house. This is St. Anthony Hall. It's now the Center for Development Economics. Wonderful transformation, I think. I knew by the end of my senior year that fraternities had outlived their usefulness here. And I experienced that when I went over to deliver a total opportunity bid to a student who had passed all the way through the first rushing process. And I walked over to Berkshire Quad to tell him that we wanted him to join the house. And I remember after I finished doing that, I had this feeling that we should not be doing this. We shouldn't put a Williams student in the position that this student had been put into, passing all the way through the rush and then getting a total opportunity bid. Turned out to be one of the best things my house ever did. But I thought to myself, no, fraternities are something whose time has come. The other thing he did, of course, was take us coed, and my favorite story about Williams going coed, well, told me by Whit Stoddard. I'm sure that face is familiar to many of you. Love this picture of him with Jack Sawyer. Whit told me that he was walking down toward Cole Field one day, and the women's field hockey team had just played Amherst, and they were coming up from Cole Field. And Whit yelled, "How'd we do?" And one of the demure young ladies said, "We just beat the crap out of Amherst," and she didn't use crap. And Whit said, I knew from that point on everything was going to be okay. Williams going coed, not a problem. It happened. Perhaps it was one of these young ladies. I don't know. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. So, to summarize, in terms of recruiting this amazing group of students, this is the way we were back in my day. Nothing wrong with this. I think this is the AD house, right? Those of you remember? It's now called Perry House. I have trouble, by the way, getting from the fraternity Greek letters to the new stuff. This is the way we used to look. Nothing wrong with that. This is the way we look now. This is better. I mean, let's face it. There was nothing wrong with that. Many of us are a product of that. But this is better. This is the Williams of today, this remarkable place where we have the luxury, the absolute amazing luxury of need-blind admission, something that's absolutely vital to sustaining our student body. We have got to be able to continue to do this. So, in summary, let me finish. Recruit and hold a great faculty. Recruit a fabulous, diverse, talented student body, and sustain that sense of community. And here's where I want to say something that I haven't had a chance to say publicly before about this individual. I served with Greg on the Presidential Search Committee. I was the faculty secretary for that committee. And I think that service impressed on me as deeply as anything I've ever experienced here, the power of community at Williams. And it sprang from Greg's leadership. And I haven't had a chance to thank him in a public forum for his leadership in that enterprise, but the trustees, the faculty, the staff, the students, from the very beginning, we were a cohesive group. We were a wonderful expression of this community sense of Williams, and we owe that in large measure to Greg Avis. Thank you, Greg.